what do you think they're going to do this second term? They're going to rise up again. And they've been angry the past 4 years. Children are being herded out of elementary schools and sent to the border. Who's going to block the roads? If National Guard come into your city and fuck up protests, how are you going to oppose the police? Are they going to try and make people slaves again? I think it's a revolutionary, lazy argument.
Of a special counsel, Mueller will have leeway to run the investigation as he sees fit.
And President Trump goes abroad.
So I'm going to be very brief. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another special episode of the Dugout. Hello. This episode is cool because I know we've done many episodes, but we haven't ever done a video episode, and I haven't ever done an episode alone. But my co-host is gone for a few days, and I felt really compelled to talk about this topic because I've been seeing it a lot in the news. I've been seeing a lot of people talk about it online, especially with Trump's kind of money fraud, tax evasion, collusion trial happening right now. And a lot of discourse happening around Palestine, Congo, capitalism, wealth, how we're dealing with the economic conditions that we're living under, and how it relates to this oncoming US presidential election. I always say election years are very intense periods of time. It awakens a lot of people. It raises a lot of questions. And I think especially being radicalized in the US, it kind of pisses me off. Election years piss me off. And the biggest sentiment I want to kind of unpack in this conversation is I've had a lot of conversations recently with especially leftists who I ask, oh, do you think Trump is going to win? What do you think? And a lot of people say, I think if Trump wins, it would mean that more people would be aware of the evils of our political system. Both the Democratic Party and Republican Party are sinister, they're evil, but with Democrats, it's easier for liberals and progressives to kind of be like, oh, it's fine. They're trying their best, but with Trump, you see how racist he is. You see how fascist he is. You see how xenophobic he is. And so during the first term, people are going to notice, wake up, and show out in numbers. And this really bothers me. Like when I've had conversations with my comrades about this, I look at them like, are you fucking kidding me? And there's a lot of reasons why, but a lot of the reasons why relate to like some of my thoughts on accelerationalism, some of my thoughts on suffering, about revolutionary processes. So this is a podcast episode for anyone who wants to engage in what we think a second Trump presidency would look like, what it means for revolutionaries and radicals, and how we should maybe be thinking about the language that we're using when engaging with why we should or shouldn't want him to win, or why we do or don't think he will win, or why we do or don't think it would be good for revolutionaries that we think he will win. And there is a podcast episode that really brought this all into perspective for me. There's a podcast called The Daily, which came out with an episode about a month ago called Trump 2.0, what a second Trump presidency would bring. But this episode essentially delves into Trump's kind of first term, how the first 3 years were different than his last year, how all of the criticism and the iffiness of the people that he hired to work with him who eventually turned against him or quit, how all of that made Trump way more into authoritarianism, on wanting to control who's in his cabinet, on wanting to control what kind of lawyers are judging whatever kind of legislation or laws or bills that he wants to pass. And essentially, this podcast talks about how Trump wants a government that believes in the president's power more than anything, that believes in executive power. And how Trump literally has been bragging the past 4 years about how he wants to like arrest people that were against him, and how these terrorists or these anti-patriotic people need to sit down, and basically saying all this violent, repressive, authoritarian stuff about what he is willing to do when he comes into office again. And I want to state this very clearly. If Trump becomes president later this year, if he wins this oncoming election, our US government will become even more authoritarian, will lean more towards fascism, and way more people's lives, health, and their safety will be on the line. And I think we should first assert that, take it seriously. That's going to look like more books being banned in schools. That's going to look like critical race theory being downgraded. It's going to look like more peelbacks on reproductive rights. It's going to look like more restrictive laws for immigration, more people being locked up at the borders, more funding for police, more funding for military, more surveillance of mass mobilizations, more repression of anti-fascist movements. And all of these are things that we saw the first term, but it will only theoretically get worse if Trump becomes president again. And there are so many reasons I think this, but I will also add that it seems silly to me that people are like, oh yeah, second Trump presidency, like we're ready to throw down. And I'm like, people threw down the first term, but did that really lead to an impeachment? Did it lead to people being ungovernable? Did it lead to the revolutionary processes that we imagine that comrades and leftists and grassroots organizers would be prepared for? And granted, the first Trump term was unprecedented in a lot of ways. It surprised a lot of people. I think people stepped up and did what was necessary, but I don't think we should fall into this kind of like mindset where we're saying like, oh, we're ready. Like it's going to make people wake up. I don't believe in white people that much. Let's just start there. But I want to get into what I think this kind of argument or thought process around thinking that Trump becoming president is going to make revolutionary processes more easier, more accessible, or more understandable for people to engage in. And I want to break down what I think the different parts of this argument are. The first thing I want to break down is I think this argument is built upon the assumption that accelerationalism will help us. And for those that don't know, accelerationalism in the context of anarchism is a theory that suggests accelerating the pace of social, economic, or technological change to hasten the collapse of existing systems, such as capitalism and the state. Anarchist accelerationalism proposes that by accelerating these processes, the contradictions within these systems will intensify, leading to their eventual breakdown or collapse. This approach often contrasts with the more gradualist or reformist strategies within anarchist thought, which may focus on building alternative systems or directly challenging existing power structures through various means such as protest, direct action, community organizing. Acceleration anarchists can believe that by pushing systems to their breaking point, it creates opportunities for radical change. However, it's worth noting that there are different interpretations. So I agree with this interpretation a lot. And I mean, I can say I'm into accelerationism. I'm into like, let's just do this. Let's do it. Let's do it. But I think my problem is that accelerationalism on a national scale with global implications means that people that have way less privilege than me, people that have way less of a capacity to theorize are going to be on the chopping block. Immigrants, undocumented people, sex workers, trans people, non-binary people, disabled people, dark-skinned people, people that are anti-authoritarianism, people that are anti-fascist, people that organize mass mobilizations, people that are environmentalists. All of these groups of people are part of movements that push for some kind of sway in our material conditions, for some kind of human rights, or for some kind of campaign that will change some of the material conditions around the demands that we're facing. And accelerationalism, I think, is saying like, if we look at the parts of our system that are most evil or weird or exploitative, if we can push or expose how those systems can reach their breaking point, it'll help arise the conditions that make mass mobilization and revolutionary processes more possible for most people. The flaw in this is the assumption that an acceleration of the processes that will lead to a breaking point will lead to a revolutionary process. If environmental economic collapse occurs during a Trump presidency, I think that the military and government will only make things worse and will only lead to more suffering. Does that not mean that direct action and mutual aid and community organizing won't happen? No. But I think accelerationalism is, in this standpoint, somewhat of a privileged argument to kind of make, because you're assuming that this accelerationalism won't impact you or the people around you, and or you're not really accounting for the fact that it will affect other people way fucking worse than you. And I don't think accelerationalism will always help us, especially in the standpoint of the West, where individualism forces people to have to look at their close community and the people around them in order to really act, unless their political theory is based in solidarity. So to me, accelerationalism is, in this context, based in a hope that if things get worse, people will react. And I don't believe in Americans enough. I don't believe in the masses enough. I think 2020, at least, and other periods of mass mobilization I've experienced, especially 2020, the reason that so many people showed up is because it was a pandemic, because they were in the house, because they were bored. That's what made people show up for racial justice. And then the second aspect of this argument that I think is assumed is that increased repression will make it easier or more apparent for people that our system is messed up. I don't think revolutionary processes should. I think instead of repression doing the work of waking people up, revolutionary processes should do the work. And what I don't like is that we know that a Trump presidency will lead to more repression. We know that he is going to try and control the Supreme Court, control the Congress, control the Senate. We know that he's going to be attacking mainstream media, that he's going to be ousting journalists from the White House, that our access to transparent knowledge about what the government is doing is going to lessen and lessen and lessen. And this repression will make it easier for the police and for the military to be swayed in more fascistic directions. I think that will lead to more crackdowns of mass mobilizations and protests, more mass arrests, which will cause campaigns to have to deal with a lot more economically and legally in order to even get to the point where we can mass mobilize. And maybe this will mean that our strategies will have to change based on the repression, but I don't think it's the safest assumption to say that repression will make it easier or more apparent for people to see that our system is messed up. I think repression, the easiest outcome is that it makes people more afraid, that it shuts them off in their little worlds, that it puts a stigma around the act of political resistance and direct action. And that stigma will make people stay at home. It'll make people post about it online, but not do much else. And it'll just mean that the stakes will be higher for the average person. And for the average person, the stakes are already too high. Like some people want to march, some people want to go into the streets, but a lot of people don't. And I think that revolutionary processes should be doing the work to expose repression, regardless of the conditions that we're under. But to say that a certain kind of government will help us make repression more apparent, I think it's ignoring the fact that regardless, we still have to do the work. And repression is all around us. So why wish for a more repressive government or be okay with it because it'll make things more obvious? To me, it just seems like, why do you want the work to come to you? Like, we're supposed to go to them. We're supposed to be meeting them. Like, reactionary? No. Doing more to expose the systems around us? Yes. Do you get what I'm saying? Do you get what I'm saying? And then another counterpoint that I want to make is kind of tied is that people will rise up during a second Trump term. This is a complicated point to me for a lot of different reasons, because I think during the first Trump presidency, there are a lot of things that are easy to kind of skim over or to like not fully remember. And I'm thinking of the fact that so many people before the election happened in 2016 were like, oh, Trump is going to win. That's not possible. Like, no. The election happened. Everyone was shocked. I was shocked. But I definitely had white friends that were, or people just in my life that were like, oh my gosh, it's so upsetting. Like I'm trans or I'm queer and I don't know what the world is right now. And I just don't know what to say. And I can't really talk about it. And I don't mean to laugh. I don't mean to trivialize, but maybe I do, because when this happened, it was on the heels of me that year living in Seattle, getting fired from a job, getting another organizing job, moving to Montana, experiencing all this racism, coming back, getting a super packed job, quitting, going to Standing Rock, facing all this repression. So I think 2016 was my radicalizing year. And to see all of these people around me, close or not, be like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. And I'm so surprised. And I felt the same way. But what I noticed is, especially with people that were less politically activated, it paralyzed them in a way that I think was self-serving. And I do believe mental health and processing what's happening nationally matters. But if you are of a more privileged space in the US on this land, I do think there is a responsibility sometimes to get past your personal emotions, to look at a structural wrong that is happening, to analyze it, to look at your local community, to see how we can protect each other, to be strategic and actionable about how we resist. And the kind of self-serving, like, oh, I don't know if I can handle it. Like a lot of people got over that, but I think it showed like people tuck into their turtle shells. People get scared. And yes, a lot of people rose up, but I also think this sort of romanticism of mass mobilizations and campaigns and movements can be good because showing physical power matters. But I do also think we fall into this trap where we think mass mobilization equals the next steps in the revolutionary process that we need. And there is so much more I can say to this, but I do think in the Western standpoint, in the US standpoint, mass mobilizations are kind of our bread and butter. It's kind of what we've been taught to do. It's relatively state sanctioned unless things get out of control. And it's a form of political activity that is very legible to people in the US. And the fact that a lot of Trump's evils and wrongs, like, yeah, there were airport shutdowns and other tactics that were kind of utilized. But I think the biggest thing that we saw a lot during the Trump presidency was a willingness to mass mobilize, whether it be the hashtag Me Too or March for Our Lives or Black Lives Matter or any of the countless political things that happened that made it necessary for people to show up. This form of rising up, I think, is different than direct action. It's different than mutual aid. It's different than finding your own ways to have abortions. It's different than guerrilla tactics. It's different than going underground. And all of these aren't readily what the regular public person will have to engage in. But I do think rising up is something that we'll have to redefine, because if I'm thinking of also the first Trump presidency, I mean, a lot of people were like, we're going to be in governor, fuck the government, we're in governor. I pay taxes. Did I want to? No. But this notion of rising up and ungovernability is something I take really seriously. And I think before I can assume that people will rise up and like the resistance will happen, I want to ask people, what do we think rising up will look like in a second Trump term? What revolutionary course of action do we think will be politically necessary? And I think protecting ourselves and how we plan things is going to be necessary. I think forming our own ways of sharing media and news will be necessary. I think democratizing the way that we look at the internet or media will be necessary. I also think taking back control of our local institutions will be necessary. If there's a school district in your city that wants to take away books by Latinx authors, how do we take back that institution or that judge or that democratic process? How do we sway if or how our institutions are trying to repress us? And so I think essentially we will have to really recontextualize what rising up looks like, because if we also look at the Trump presidency, the alt-right, the right wing, they rose up. What do you think they're going to do this second term? They're going to rise up again. And they've been angry the past 4 years, and they've been fighting the fact that Trump should have won the second election. And it is not looking good. Like, I just feel like to assume that people will rise up, I don't have enough faith in people. Like, I believe that people want a better world, but I don't have enough faith that people are going to actually, oh my God, Trump won. Like, what do we got to do? No, I think people are going to be scared again. And then the other assumption that I think this makes is that things will get hard, and this will make it easier for us somehow, or it'll be more gratifying to revolutionaries. Like, oh, more people are going to see it, what I've been talking about. And this is what I read in this base argument. It's not necessarily what every comment has told me, but I think it's the different parts of it that bother me that I need to talk through. A few years ago, I was traveling with a black friend, and we were talking about the Trump presidency, our thoughts on it. And this black friend was like, oh, I liked when Trump was president because he shitted on other groups of people, and immigrants that come here and like want to hate on black people, they got a lot to deal with and black people got less. I was like, what? And me and my friend ended up talking for like an hour and a half, 2 hours. I dug into her. I was like, what you're saying is xenophobic. It's messed up. If a white person was saying it, it would be a problem. So why is it okay if you're black? Let's unpack that. We talked. And basically they were looking at, my friend was analyzing that when richer immigrants come here, they tend to denigrate black people, which I can totally understand. I mean, anti-blackness is global. But what I found in this conversation was a marginalized person saying that Trump's vitriol and bigotry made it somehow easier on black people. And to her, I was like, black people were still getting killed by police. Trump still was talking shit about the black people getting killed by police. Trump was still calling various shithole countries, and those are like African countries, part of our diaspora. Do you only care about your standpoint as a black American? This is difficult for me to engage with because I want to have faith in other people of color. But to hear a person of color say that, a black person, I was like, and we ended up getting to a shared understanding. We got to the same kind of place, but it was weird for me because I was kind of like, why would you say this? Like, if you're not an organizer and you're not ready to resist and be an anti-fascist, you're welcoming harm upon people that have way more to lose than you. So you just saying this is like an act of permission when you're not actually going to intervene when other people get fucked up. And that's fucked up. My thoughts around a Trump presidency and how I think we should be really careful and nuanced about how we look at the level of harm that we and other people will have to face. To me, it seems naive to claim that we can quantify or control or guide the parameters of this harm. If National Guard come into your city and fuck up protests, how are you going to oppose the police? Children are being herded out of elementary schools and sent to the border. Who's going to block the roads? Healthcare is taken away from certain demographics of people. If certain state resources are taken away from certain demographics of people, how are we going to organize and give people the things that they need? These are all questions that I think we have to take seriously. We have to think about our current capacity to do this. And if we don't have the current capacity, we either have to say that we will get there and these are the steps, or that we're not ready and that the situation will prove itself to us. But to say that we can predict or like it's going to be bad, but we can handle it. I'm like, I don't know how bad things will get or can get. I have ideas. I think the environment will exacerbate things. I think Trump is a fucking idiot and the rich people around him will hold him up and put I don't even know. But even for me, I'm kind of like, I don't know how bad things can get in this future world, in this future system. Even for someone of my identity, are they going to try and make people slaves again? Am I going to have to be running through marshes? Am I going to maroonage? And all of these are questions I take really seriously. And I think we deserve to honor our fear just as much as we want to honor our capacity to resist. I think managing people's fear and their expectations is a real part of any revolutionary process. And so to kind of end, I think my biggest counterpoint about this kind of sentiment around Trump and it may be making things easier when or make things more detectable, I think it's a revolutionary, lazy argument. I think it is a revolutionary's job, a revolutionary collective or movement's job to consciousness raise, to mass mobilize, to be an antagonistic force to the state and the systems that it props up, and to build out the possibilities that make revolutionary processes possible. Yes, I believe reactionary activism or direct action or politicality is justified when we're literally just trying to go toe to toe against the system. But I do think there's a part of us that has to be prepared to plan ahead, to prepare, to really see how we can be antagonistic instead of waiting for the state to show its full force of violence, to show all of its cards. Because I think this assumption that Trump is going to make the revolution a more tangible thing, I think it means that we want the revolution to come to us as opposed to bringing the revolution to the state. And that to me is the problem. We should be highly aware of the suffering ingratiated in our movements, the suffering that we're permitting through our political opinions and our ideas, the erasure that we're permitting. I believe my job as a revolutionary is to want to act, understand violence, understand self-defense, understand the ways that I can defend myself and my communities and be a human being. And some of that looks easy, some of that looks scary. One of the underlying goals, I believe, is we should reduce the unnecessary suffering that is involved in our revolutionary processes. Because if we look at capitalism, imperialism, exploitation, it necessitates suffering in order to subjugate people and make them afraid, to have them accept the status quo. And so what does it mean to have a revolutionary process where we're get ourselves out of this system, but we're ignoring the amount of unnecessary suffering that certain trespasses will allow? How we protect the environment, our educational systems, how we protect ourselves from the police, from the military, from the state. All of these are questions of a revolutionary process that I think has to account for the suffering we're trying to reduce, what the state forces us to experience, and also the unnecessary suffering that can come up in a revolutionary process led by revolutionaries, led by the masses, led by grassroots movements. This aspect of unnecessary suffering is also tied to our privilege. If I have more privilege and I am less on the chopping block, I should use my privilege to make sure that others suffer less and unnecessarily so. So I hope this video episode gave you a lot to think about. It really mattered a lot to me that I did this. I did this in a really frank way, that I just kind of talked about things. I've been thinking about this a lot. This is a question I've been asking a lot of my friends. I love when I go through periods of political time where I have a question. I need to talk to people about it. And this is my question for you as we end this episode. What do you think a second Trump presidency will bring economically, politically, culturally? What do you think this potential second term will say about where we are as a people, as a nation? And what do you think will be necessary of us if we want liberation and revolution during a second Trump presidency? What will we have to do? What should we be afraid of? What are your considerations? Let us know in the comments, and please like, comment, and subscribe. Let us know if you want to see more video episodes. I had fun doing this, and I definitely have more ideas. Maybe I'll do a follow-up because I'm sure my thoughts on this will change as the election continues and more things happen in the world. But for now, thank you for watching The Dugout, and catch you next time.